So now I will ask my panel, who wants to say first, is this our dominant image of refugees? What does it tell us? Omar, maybe you want to go first, being a refugee yourself.
Yeah. So the question is,
is this the dominant image? Do you agree that this is the dominant image of refugees? And if yes, what does it tell us?
Well, for me, it tells that there are people on move, and they are not in the best situation, and that's it. And this is the heritage of refugee photographies, I guess, in the last 100 years.
And Joyce, what do you see? What is your idea when you look at this?
It's groups of people mostly, first of all, and people on the move, as Omar said. You can't tell anything about their, just like the image you just showed, and someone from the audience responded and said, I don't know where they're from, I don't know where they're going. It's the same for these people. I don't know where they're from, and I don't know where they're going. I know nothing about them except for that they're traveling at the moment.
On the move. Donald, what do you see? And please take this one.
Mm-hmm. What do I see?
Yeah.
Well, I was just reading the other day about Festung Europa, Fortress Europe, in relation to the Atlantic Wall of Hitler, who wanted to sort of surround it so the invading Allied hordes couldn't sort of cross the shores, breach the shores. And also, though, how Festung Europa has become sort of the standardized response by European politicians. So now it's sort of referred to as Fortress Europe as well. So this idea of a militarized defensive structures around Europe might have disappeared in 1945, but they've always sort of been around. And
it's
these
like storming,
pictures are,
the troops are storming our continent.
And in this case, from a European or a white perspective, it's the hordes are coming to crash through the walls of Europe. So for me, I think from a general, say, European perspective, that's kind of the image that is being portrayed. Certainly with the pictures of the boats, and it's always groups. It's never sort of, it's rarely sort of humanized by the individual. It's sort of the faceless masses, especially the Vluchtelingen, where you can never kind of sense any idea of humanity. It's rather this kind of mass that's coming.
But still, somehow, in 2015, mainly when these shots were all over the newspapers, somehow there was a positive response to the Syrians coming to Europe. I mean, there was also a lot. It also evoked a lot of solidarity. How do you think that's possible when it's also about the masses? What?
But has that translated in how many refugees from this crisis in 2015 have settled in the Netherlands?
Good point. Good point. So maybe the solidarity that it evoked didn't actually go into action. It didn't really translate to action. How come? Is that because of these images? There wasn't solidarity.
About even at the academy. Oh, thanks. About even this kind of picture that are just portraying a wrong really kind of image of refugees, because even the guy from Syria that you said that he was a refugee himself, I didn't see him having kind of an empathy toward this picture, because at the end of the day, this picture is just portraying something that is overseen, and people suffering is already overseen, and nobody's trying to actually reach the human being in terms of empathy, because we see, if it's not a refugee crisis, something happening, I don't know, in Africa, because from the white perspective, every time we talk about something that is not in Europe, has always been portrayed in a way that is like that. So it doesn't reach human beings. Yeah. You cannot do it.
Thanks. Sorry. Donald, how do you then teach your students, if this is the dominant image, how do you teach your students to not keep on Let me just look for the word because I did write it down. It's easier. How do you prevent it from repeating and confirming it as a young or upcoming photographer? How do you teach them to not repeat that?
Well, I think one thing we have to be cautious is we need to recognize this as a predominant image, but it doesn't necessarily make it bad or good. It's an image that has sort of been defined. I think on an institutional level, and there's actually some students in the office, think of something else. Okay. Soon it'll be an office, I guess. But I think part of the institutional responsibility is to allow a student to connect and to understand with what it is that they're trying to say and what it is that they want to investigate and how they want to investigate. So it's a question of what empowers me or what interests me as a photographer, because I find I was a globe-trotting photojournalist for a number of years, and part of the reason I sort of started distancing myself further and further away from it is, other than the backbreaking nature of the work, is the fact that I didn't really know anything other than I was pretty good at making a photograph that could somewhat concisely communicate the image or the situation at that moment, precisely at 4:07 p.m. But I think what we sort of need to understand is how do we create relationships of engagement through pictures. So that's kind of creating, let's say, a citizenship of the image. So that means I, as the creator, the photographer, the people at hand that you're choosing to photograph, but also very much an audience. I think Robin sort of mentioned something about that as well. So I think if you start creating a sense of not necessarily responsibility, but citizenry, so all three of us are in this kind of relationship together, and that also then starts to shift the power balance from photographer to all of us. And lastly, the other thing... Within
this triangle of viewer, maker, and subject.
Yes,
so you need to constantly be conscious of this triangle.
Yeah, but also that I think Davide was talking about empathy, which I think is very important, but also it's not just the photographer's responsibility, but it's your responsibility as the consumer of the image as well, and how you choose to engage with those images.
And because... Joyce, as an impact producer, you kind of like you're a broker between maybe the photographer, the subject, and the audience. I think it's a new player in the field of photography, impact producers. What do you feel is your responsibility as an impact producer in this dominant visual culture of refugees like this, for example?
Yeah, I like the question of the woman in the back of the audience with the blonde bob cut who asked, so your responsibility ends at the image. And that's sort of where we come in as impact producers. So we work with storytellers, not just photographers, but documentary filmmakers, theater makers, writers, to first of all research that context in which you're making your story. So we would look at this and see what you're responding to, or in which context you're acting, and not just in the story realm, but also which organizations are active in the field that your story is about. What are dominant perspectives now, and what is your role in that? What do you want as a storyteller? Do you want to change something? But because only if you want to, and change maybe is a big word, but if you want to have an impact, and that can be as small as adding something to people's perspectives and as big as creating policy change, I would say that there is a responsibility with the storyteller to be proactive about that and to be conscious about the message that you're sending. So I think that's also a question you asked Robin. Does that mean that you have to check what your image communicates to the audience? If you have a very clear idea of what your message has to be and what you want to achieve with that, yeah, then it makes sense to check with your audience if that's what it communicates. And if it communicates something differently, maybe you can provide context to make sure that it is more clear, or you can find a solution to that.
And would that be your role as an impact producer to help create that context for a photographer, for example, or to check what the audience has seen? I mean, what do we need to understand of impact producer?
To place it in that context. So we work very much with partners. So we find partners for stories to make sure that the story gets to the people that need to see it for the impact that the storyteller wants to happen. And that the message that the storyteller wants to get across is communicated. So I like this very much, the newspaper project, where we're also working on a couple of stories that have to do with refugees. And one of the first things that storytellers will say is, I want to reach that underbelly of society and I don't know how to reach it. Well, I don't think that underbelly is very far away. I think you can probably find it among your family members or among your neighbors or friends or whatever it is that you mean with that. But just being conscious about the way that you distribute your product and also the way you present it, that already can make a difference in what you are able to achieve with it. And by presenting it in a very accessible format, it doesn't have to be expensive to print a newspaper. So you've chosen to invest the funds that you were able to get into this newspaper format, and you went door to door to distribute it, making sure that at least everyone has the opportunity to access it. And you can do that yourself, as you did, or you can find a partner who you said you partnered or you spoke with Vluchtelingenwerk. You can find a partner who's already reaching the audience you want to reach, and let them do the work for you. Yeah.
Omar, you've developed, I don't know, maybe a very personal approach to the subject refugees. Maybe we can see some of Omar's work. Who knew work from Omar before coming in here? Not so many. All right. So there's enough to talk about. That's nice. Bas knows, obviously. So it's a little bit surreal. I mean, it's like a dream world that you're creating. What do you want to achieve? What are we? Let us first ask. What are we looking at? What do we see? What are the images Live, Love, Refugee shows?
Well, you are seeing the same refugees you have seen when you Googled this.
Yeah.
But it's just different angle and different process.
Mm-hmm.
And that for so many reasons, because this is my visual language, and it's my story, as I am a refugee myself.
Maybe we can just stop at one image, for example. What do we see here, and what's the story?
The process for the project that I met those people. Sometimes they are friends, like this guy is an artist, a writer. And sometimes they are refugees in the camp I met when I used to be a volunteer with the NGOs.
Mm-hmm.
So I go and listen to their stories, and then I choose one concept to focus on. I go back home and I do the brainstorming about how to recreate this and to reshape all the painful stories. Usually they are stories about someone have been killed or raped or pushed from the 4th floor or arrested and tortured. So it's not so funny. But the challenge was how to make viewable images out of these stories. Because usually in the Syrian case, we made it less attractive. Mm-hmm. So if you Google Syria now, everything you see is bloody images for fighters or children. So you don't feel empathy and you want to escape this. I mean, once I was in Vienna and I've seen a demonstration and they show those images and I didn't want to look at them.
And so you did take some very sad stories, but also dreams of people that you met.
Yeah.
Mainly in refugee camps?
Mostly, but like this one or the couple in the sea, they are urban refugees, people who pay their rent, like me in Beirut, because I stayed there 4 years.
Yeah.
And I try to follow as well what the word of refugee mean. And I'm not pretty sure if that's offending or not. Like when you want to introduce me, now you say wasn't sure. Like if you want to use the word refugee,
true.
Because maybe I get offended. And for me, he's just someone who left his country because of war.
Yeah. And but just to also to go back to your images, you try to also portray their dreams, maybe, or make a more. Is it about making a more positive image? What was your aim? What did you want to achieve by making this series?
Yeah, to express myself, as Robin said, and their stories and dreams. Like for example, this young girl get married at age of 16 to a 32 other refugee guy in the next camp for them, and she didn't want to get married for him. So at the first night, she refused to have sex with him, and he called his older sisters. So they tied her and they start raping her. So all of a sudden she said, you should leave me because I'm not virgin. And they shocked because of this confronting sentence. So later on, after a lot of details, she asked the guy to sleep with her just to prove him that she is a virgin. And then she asked for divorce. So the whole story was for me so difficult to express, but I didn't want to leave the girl in a hidden part of the world when no one wants to spend hours with her.
And what did you show here then? What is portrayed here?
Well, when I asked her about that night, because she told me my body was haunted with bad spirits, because she didn't know what exactly happened to her. And she said, at that night, I wish to become a dragon and burn them and everyone else in that tent. So then I rent the same wedding dress and I took her to the same makeup artist of her wedding. And we use a real fire with this. And I mean, it's black and white, so you cannot see that much. So then I give her the theme of the dragon.
So you made her the dragon. You made her what she wished to be.
Yeah. She was blowing fire, real fire.
And who do you want to reach with this story? I mean, how many people has it reached, and has it succeeded in this?
Yeah, according to the usual terms, it succeeds because I show it. I'm not sure, like something like 18 or 20 exhibition around the world, mostly in Europe and the States. I don't know exactly how the reaction of the American audience, because I'm not allowed to travel there. But people in Europe were so excited because they want to feel the neighbors, the new neighbors. And for them, we are mass of mysterious community Also because a lot of the refugees, they don't speak language or the culture.
So it makes them mysterious.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you actually reinforce that mystery maybe with these.
Well, I just try to provoke question. So I don't know where it's end. Because sometimes you focus, like in one of those pictures, people here focus on the feminism part of the photo, because it has to do with your personality and with your background about the Middle East. So all of a sudden, if you feel like, okay, women are having more right because of war, so you feel kind of happy. I mean, you don't thank war for this, but you want to focus more on this because this is a topic you care about in the Western country.
Donald, do you think a non-refugee or Western photographer could have made have the same approach and tell the same story?
Oh.
Does it matter who you are in telling these kind of stories?
No, I don't think. I can't answer that question because I come from Canada and I live kind of a nice life. You know, we had like a green lawn and lived close to the lake and boring and things were functioning. So I think it's, and not to say that we cannot comment on it, but I just think it's a completely sort of different space. And I think what kind of going back to the question you were asking me before, okay, well, how can you train a student to be a photographer? And I think it just comes again back to just sort of having an understanding of what it is that you're trying to say. But it also goes, I think, Omar was saying something about empathy. You need to sort of solicit empathy in the reading of an image, but I also think it goes beyond just empathy. And maybe partly the reason why the image of the refugee is as it is as a photograph is because we've accepted that empathy is enough. But maybe what it has to be is the idea of responsibility and how you can provoke action from an audience to sort of engage with that photo. Because I can look at these photos and say, shit, that sucks.
And then still
I empathize.
Yes.
I do. But
you also empathize maybe with the images that you saw before of the people on the boat.
Perhaps. But Joyce wants to say something.
Yeah.
Now, when you said sort of a call to action or suggestions for action going beyond that empathy, I do think visual stories especially are great for evoking empathy, and that's I've worked with a lot of documentary filmmakers this year, and they refer to the documentary genre as the empathy machine. And if you couple that empathy with suggestions or tools for action, you have a very powerful instrument, and that also can be very small or can be a very big campaign, but it can be as little as Jonathan Turgovnik did when he did the story on the Rwandan women who were raped in the war. Every time he had that published, he asked the editors to include a small box which included information on how you could help, how you could donate, or where you could find more information. And that's a very easy thing to do, to ask anyone you're working with to include something like that. And that is also something that helps the reader or whoever is receiving your story, because a lot of people feel like we're being overwhelmed with information, and we're seeing so much trouble all around the world, and what are we going to do with all that information? But if you provide them with the tools to do something, which can be a very small thing, or if you want to have change at policy level, come up with what you want to see change there, and make sure that you reach those policy makers. And that's, I think, what the correspondent refers to as constructive journalism, to not stop at the problem, but to go beyond that. And
Omar, do you think it's your responsibility, after you've published a photo story, to also have a call to action as a photographer?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the call to action is something too mathematic for me.
Yeah.
I'm an artist. But I would like people to have more understanding for this issue and any other issue, like not just get the superficial image you get from news and mass media or the first page of Google. If you do care about, because I didn't know a lot about the Balkan refugees or war in Rwanda before I have my own war. I didn't know a lot about the Iraqi refugees who were in Syria.
So, but Joyce is saying that. Well, maybe my question would be actually for you: do you want to provoke action, or do you want to make a call for empathy or sympathy and understanding, not necessarily resulting in action?
I would choose to mix them, like understanding who lot for action. In general, better understanding would be society changing, for sure.
Yeah, please.
But also, I think when we talk about action, it's great to sort of donate, say, to a cause or something, but also action is an internal action within your own sort of mind and sensibilities. So action doesn't necessarily always have to be the provocative act, but it's also, it was sort of saying a little bit earlier, what actually I like about photography is that it can sort of, it can provide, it inscribes in its material presence of an image, a citizenry or an identity to those who have been sort of revoked from that. And so through the engaging of the image itself, you go beyond the empathy and you start sort of engaging with the citizenship of life today. That actually means you are sort of present and you're engaged and you're able to sort of consider, say, the life of this woman or of somebody else. So in other words, by just purely engaging, and it's a sort of a philosophical tactic, I guess, but just by engaging with the image on an actionable level, you provide a citizenship to somebody who doesn't necessarily have it anymore. And that, to me, is sort of enough. And then, of course, on the other scale is what Joyce is talking about, like put the bank account number in there, and then there's actually something that's proven. But in both ways, there's still now, instead of passive, it becomes active.
And Joyce, you were saying about documentary photography as the empathy machine, was that it? Sympathy machine? This is more artistic. As an impact producer, does it make a difference for you if it's artistically or more documentary kind of project?
So far we found that you might want to use a little bit more context when you're using that in a campaign that focuses on changing something. So if it can be even more effective in creating engagement if it's more artistic, but to make the translation from that to action, if that's what you're looking for, then you might need a little bit more context around that in the form of text or another media product, for example.
But impact is not necessarily always action. It can also be understanding or sympathy as such.
Yeah, I agree with everything Donald just said. And a change in thoughts or a change in perceptions, that's also impact. And that can also be a support base for someone else to then take action, for example. Or it can be enough in itself, just having people tweak their views on something.
Omar, why did you choose for more artistic photography rather than documentary?
Well, I came from filmmaking background, like independent short filmmaking, so I'm not really a documentary photographer. But in this program, because I made this program in I made this project in Arab documentary photography program. That's right. Yeah, and they choose me because I can mix the fiction with the documentary. And first, it's what I enjoy doing. And second, for the audience, I guess it's more attractive because in the photography industry in Syria, like the principal media prefer the photos with blood. So I know friends of mine in Syria, and they told me if we send the editor normal photo, they in Syria it's not that cheesy. So they prefer like someone blowing his head, and you catch the moment. So I tried to be cheesy, but in alternative way, like because you can buy this image and hang it in your bedroom, while you will not hang Alan Kurdi photo, even he got the maximum empathy of the world.
Very true, very true. Is there anybody who wants to ask a question while we're going? Yes. I'll just turn to the audience for a moment. Hi. Please say your name and try to ask your question short and to the point.
Hi, I'm Mika, and I have a question for you, Omar. Yeah. When we were, sorry, we're going to go a while back now, but when we were looking at the photos, when you type in refugee on Google, and you also call yourself a refugee, do you recognize yourself in those first photos that come up when you look on the internet for the word refugee?
Well, I don't feel myself that much because I came here with an airplane. Thanks for the exhibition and tour I had last year. But yeah, I know a lot of friends, and I heard a lot of stories for people who came like those refugees. And yes, I can feel it, but also I have kind of pain inside because, as you mentioned, we see mass and we don't see faces. So we see numbers, and we see what we already know. So I wonder why you would send a photographer there in the mud and sand just to make the same photos. You can just add color to the black and white photos you have about the previous refugees. But I can understand because...
So we should put Ad van Denderen in color and then we can republish it.
Yeah, you can use Photoshop and no one will notice this.
Maybe you're right.
Because as you say, it's more about the storytelling and research you want to make. I wonder if this photographer go closer to the subject and talk to them. I mean, they are running, so they will not talk to the photographer. But it's about the communication, about where your camera is.
Joyce, you sent some examples. I asked you for some examples, and one of them was the Instagram of Aziz Kawak. Can we show that?
I didn't want to show this because it's great photography. I know there's a lot of photographers in the room. So.
Well, that's exactly why I want to bring it up.
Okay, before we see it, Aziz, just go down a little bit to see his pictures from Utrecht.
It's a screen grab, I'm
sorry.
sorry.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's visiting Paris, it seems, now. Yeah, great. He arrived in the Netherlands as a refugee coming from Syria, and he never photographed before, but decided that that would be a way to get to know his new surroundings. So he had a lot of time on his hands being in the asylum seeking center, and he started photographing. And by going through his feed and just seeing the sort of photographs he makes, it could be any sort of expat or tourist account on the Netherlands. And I thought it was such a, that showed such a different perspective on what his life as a refugee is like than what we're used to seeing. It shows such an interest in his new surroundings and such a sort of touching view on what is, for us, typically Dutch, or the beauty of our country, like the canals and all the bicycles on the streets and things like this. And I also liked how he used his photography. He exhibited it in a community center in a multicultural neighborhood in Utrecht, Lombok, and invited people from the asylum seeking center and from the neighborhood to gather and to have a conversation about their lives in that neighborhood and its surroundings. Which I guess is similar to what you're doing here with Studio Aleppo.
Yes. Well, I won't go into discussion because, Donald, I wanted to ask you, what is the difference or the importance of artistic quality in a project versus possible simplicity, which reaches a huge audience? How important is the artistic quality in this? Yeah, that's for you. You're the teacher.
Yeah, but why do I get all this?
Because your students are here and you can tell them. We talked about Humans of New York, for example, which has a huge impact and range, but is not necessarily artistically interesting.
Yeah.
So what do you teach your students?
Well, that's, I think it's a difficult argument because, we're teaching our students to make good photographs, right? Mm-hmm. So what's the currency of good? What does good even mean? How is good even defined? And actually in professional photography, good is defined if you win a prize or if you've something, right? So you have kind of an external voice saying, well, that's good. But then is the problem when it becomes good, like that Google picture of the refugees, that becomes good because I see it and I think, well, that's been considered good, so therefore I should do the same thing. Yeah. And then what happens is you kind of create this volume of nothing in the end. And then every now and then you get people like Omar who are able to sort of hone in on something. But I think what's, say, interesting about Omar's work versus the Google page is that he's servicing the story first and finding an aesthetic voice to amplify what it is that he would like to communicate. So I think a big problem is when the aesthetic drives the outcome, then you have a problem. But if you allow the story to sort of determine its own voice, then I think you can start contributing something as a photographer, which is the difference between a somebody who does it on the side as somebody who does it professionally. The idea then is that professionally you're able to sort of, well, it's not even professionally anymore because actually Humans of New York is a good example where he started off as just an amateur guy wandering the streets. Now he's making oodles of money and such off of that, so suddenly then he becomes professional. But is still sort of maintaining an amateur kind of aspect to it. But anyways, the point being, I think, is that when we allow the aesthetic voice to determine the communicative power, then we fall apart. So I think, I hope, maybe my students can say, well, actually, that you're not telling us that in class, but I like to think that we need to address the story. And you know what? If it becomes a dreamscape like Omar's, or if it is color reportage, or if it's staged, or if, I don't know, I'll do a performance piece. But if it services what it is that we're trying to tell, then I think you're somewhat okay. I don't know if that really answers your question, probably not.
No, well, not.
Well, it's a difficult one because you can't sort of, well, like, what is an aesthetic, right? So I can go somewhere else in the world and they can say, well, I think that the way that you guys take a picture is not so nice. And I can look at something else and say, well, that's not nice. So if we judge it purely on aesthetics, then we have a problem. But as Joyce is saying, like, this guy, he's obviously not a good photographer, right? But he's able to communicate. So then that also asks the question, well, what the hell is a photographer? Is it somebody who can take a good picture, or is it somebody who's able to communicate something?
So now you're asking me the question, which I was actually asking you.
See how I got out of
that? Yeah, you did. Because I was just like, where did this go? Maybe, Joyce, maybe I can ask you, when do you consider a project feasible for the Impact Academy? What kind of, like, do you have, like, standards you judge a project on, and what standard are those? I mean, when do you know, when you see something that, this will make impact, this is something I can amplify?
Yeah, we're also still finding that out ourselves because we've only been around for 1.5 years by now, and impact production, as we call it, is a new field that's developing. But we find so far that it really helps if the storyteller has a message that they want to get across. If it's just if their aim is just to document, or if they don't have a clear vision of what they're saying, that makes it very difficult to be proactive about, you know, getting that message across. You need a message to be able to communicate it. And that also helps the makers that we're working with to keep that more focused.
So you were saying, like, it's the message and it's your drive that really, when that is there, you can translate it to a wider audience.
Yeah, for example, for the documentaries that we work with, we had we wanted them to be broadcast. We said, if we're going to work with you, we need your story to be broadcast, because we need to know that we'll reach a large audience. And now we've already decided that's not good. We're going to get rid of that as a criteria, because maybe you just want to reach a very focused small audience, and that's also okay. And so we're finding out what we find important in impact, but it's not necessarily. It has more to do with the message that we can get behind, and that we feel that there's that we can add something also to the existing context, rather than the numbers that we think we're going to reach.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
Like, I'm glad Joyce said it, because a lot of the times we always talk about like an audience, like it has this massive impact, it has to reach 72 million people, and therefore it's successful. But if one of those 72 million people don't really engage or care about it, but you reach 10 people who are like, I'm going to march down there and I'm going to do something right now. I think that's also something to consider too, is not to mix up the idea of audience in terms of its volume, but in its capacity to not be passive, but to be active engagers within. Especially like work like this, right? Like if I'm going to go to wherever, the shores of Greece, I better have a focused reason to be there, and I better have an opportunity to be there. You know, actually last year, this year, last semester, whatever it is, we had a student graduate. She actually went to Canada to photograph in First Nations reserve called Attawapiskat. Long story, it's one of the highest teen suicide rates in Canada, and she came back and she wanted to make a newspaper just like this. And so we were talking about it, and she said, I asked her, so who's it for? Well, it's going to be for Dutch people, because I'm a Dutch, and it's also going to be, I'm also going to give it to the 100 most powerful people in Canada. And I thought, it's a nice idea, but is it the same product? Like, the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, is going to have a completely different response than a Dutch person. So what are you going to do about that? And she didn't necessarily consider it, but she's like, yeah, but I have an audience. I said, yeah, but you've got two audiences with completely different perspectives. And what I liked, in one hand, is that she wanted to reach a mass volume using a newspaper, just like Luke did with 27,000 people, for a specific audience here. And she's trying to connect this idea of teen suicide there, but now how can I sort of connect it to an audience here? But then she's also like, I only need to show it to 100 people. And those 100 people are going to be the most powerful in Canada. So that kind of goes to the idea of audience and how it can also completely affect or change the thing that it is that you're going to make in the end.
And Omar, is that something that you keep in mind when, because you're exhibiting in different places, is it something that you keep in mind, where am I exhibiting, in how you portray or put the exhibition?
Yeah, well, I start thinking about the audience only after I finish working on the project. Because before I'm just the artist, and I focus about my satisfaction and the subject themselves. So sometimes I cancel the photo if I delete it if they don't feel themselves in it. The mass audience, as an artist or intellectual, we will never achieve. I mean, if we want those 72 million, we just need to convince Kim Kardashian to tattoo one of my photo on her chest.
Maybe she can redo this with Kanye West, right?
Yeah, and then everyone stand with refugees. Yeah. It's just like this. But
no. So so it's not the masses, because you were telling about this image earlier. We were talking about it, that in the beginning of the project there was another image that was constantly used as a way of communicating your project, and it changed.
Yeah, I don't know if there is a reason like that. That's why I ask you who shows this picture. But only in 2017, for my opening, they focus on this image, and they choose it for Nobel Peace Center, where they had 150,000 visitors in the last 6 months. Yeah, which is my maximum number of visitors, because. And this is something I think about, like if we are showing our work for the people who are already open-minded. I mean, if no hard filters voter come to my opening, then I'm just living in my bubble, which is nice in a way because no one acts with me in racism. But if we care about the others, then we need like an impact academy.
May I say something?
Yes, please.
I think there's a discussion, a lot of maybe a bit too much of an emphasis on the, let's say, the responsibility of the artist. Because I really hope that Omar, are you going to hope? Yes. Yeah, okay. It's that Omar finds the time to make meaningful work for himself and for us, you know. And if that happens to be about, let's say, issues relating to, well, the turmoil in the Middle East or in his own country, that is okay and powerful, and it's up to us, let's say, as communicators, as Humanity House or as Paradox or as museum people, to recognize it and sometimes ask him or Joyce, do you feel it's okay if we present your work in that context? But we should not take him, let's say, captivate him in that identity as a refugee. I think he does a great contribution to providing us with a different idea that there are refugees who are not just victims, you know. I mean, that we unify always, it's a kind of a monolithic category of people struggling with life. No, there are also refugees who happen to be artists creating meaningful work, and not necessarily only about their status or their struggle or their country, you know, and determine, but also about other issues. It's very important. So I really hope you find the time. And whenever you happen to also address these other issues, up to us to also help you or ask you whether it's okay to present your work in that context, because you feel a connection with it. And I think also that is where you respond. And that's also a difference with, let's say, professional communicators or photojournalists, where you really have the target of communicating a message very clearly to as large as possible an audience. This is another way of conveying meaning to an audience through the art world, which is as important also to perceive people differently.
And just to put you in a context, you are one of the initiators of the Studio Aleppo. What was your motivation? I mean, did you believe in this idea of image being able to change the idea of refugees?
Oh, yes, very much so. It's very much, let's say, I think the main importance is to present people like individuals. I mean, always with all our biggest problem is when we start to put people in a group and only look at a group. We know what kind of horrible things come from this. And everything becomes difficult all of a sudden when you perceive individual people that you can relate to. And, well, the idea behind Studio Aleppo was, of course, let's portray them formally in the studio, which changes the aspect. People are not outside struggling to get here. And here you see, I mean, Omar comes in a plane, no one takes a picture. It's not photogenic, you know. I mean, we want people in rubber boats and dinghies coming across. That's something that we can share and put it out, you know. So there's a communication problem. So, and that's where you see, okay, so putting people in a studio and show them as citizens of a place is very important. And they're now here. So we get your picture taken. There was the idea, of course, people from a local situation inviting and paying for a second picture, not only of yourself, but of someone new to the city. And then being together in a portrait gallery and presented that way does something to the perception. And you're looking at an individual who's let's say, identity you want to get to know. And some of them are artists like Omar to get interested. What is his art about? What would this next project be about? Maybe. Huh?
Why did you choose to have a professional photographer take the picture and not an amateur? Why didn't you choose the more Humans of New York kind of approach?
Yeah, now we wanted, in terms of the feeling of being received in a place, we wanted, let's say, a high-profile photographer to do the job. So you are going to be here, and you're going to be photographed by the best photographer we have in town for you. And your picture will end up being shown in a place that's relating, let's say, to, well, where we all, let's say, that's symbolic for the town. So it's well, hopefully the atrium of City Hall. That's up for what we're aiming at with Studio, because that's where we want to be, together, at the same level, portrayed in a similar fashion. And that's the message of Studio Aleppo.
And the professional photographer also helps in reaching out to a broader audience, or newspapers, or...
It provides, I'm not saying, I mean, we love projects, let's say, with anonymous photographers, shitty photographers, because sometimes that work can be super effective and powerful. But in this situation, it is about being recognized and being part. And so the best person we can have, let's say, that is important, and the best place to be shown, or, you know, connect with you like here today is key to the project.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. So I'm going to take a few more minutes to take some questions. I'm taking a little bit more time than 5:30 because we also started later. Yeah, well, she was first. Sorry, I'm going to get back to you. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Zaira. I have a question about the allowance of having a photographer to take a picture of you in relation to yourself taking the photograph of yourself, the way that you want to project your own image. Because going back to Robin, where she said that she almost sees the projection of herself through someone, why not allowing the person to take the photograph of themselves?
Like a selfie.
Yes, yeah, it is a selfie, but in the same way also, I think it's more about feeling comfortable in how you perceive yourself. So that's the way, because she explained, for example, on that photograph where she allowed him to take off parts of his clothes and his layers, but maybe that was not his most comfortable way that he wanted to be perceived as. So.
But who are you asking the question now, because Robin is not here anymore?
It can be for Omar as well, because I think image nowadays, it's really something that we personalize. Like if I would take a photograph of myself, it would be a different photograph if he would photograph me, even though that he would try to find a moment where he said, okay, this is the moment I want to capture.
So maybe to summarize, do we actually need photographers?
In the case of...
I'm not trying to, I did simplify it a little bit, and of course you're... But
it's the same situation with the refugees, where you have the boat with 50 people coming in, or just one person where you photograph them as an individual.
Yeah, in case of the rubber boat, I've received some selfies from my friends, and it's not that good looking because you cannot see the whole amount of people. So we need a photographer to be there, an outsider. For sure, refugees or any other people can make selfies, and you can watch millions of this on Instagram. But usually the photographer is the storyteller, and he's collecting many subjects to create a sequence, if that's answering you. And I approve Robin's idea about photography in general. For me, I would like to collaborate more with the subject, but then only on the topics, while the visual aspect of the photo is my choice as well.
Yes, please.
We spoke a lot about having impact on your audience and what do you want to achieve with your work, but what was the impact for the people you photographed? I mean, if you turn it around, what's the impact on your subject by giving them this stage, or in your case, let them relive or tell you not so good memories and make an image out of that? What's the impact on the other side of the spectrum?
Yeah, it depends about the character himself. Like for Kauthar, she received a mental healing program because of my photo. And then they register her in a group when they teach her how to become a photographer and a video editor because she was impressed by my career. So this something can change. For sure, most of them, they still live in camps while I'm having good time in Amsterdam. So it's not like I'm changing their lives. At least they had good time during the session. And an important time thinking about this internal struggle and to give this answer and to rethink and reevaluate the whole situation that happened for Syrian in the last 5 years.
Yeah, please.
For me, it's more not really a question, more about appreciation for all your work. Because, for example, I study I got a master from here. It's called development study, and we talk a lot about human rights and social justice. Sometimes it's just really frustrating because every time we talk about refugee, all this doctrine and the narrative about how refugees are a victim or they're terrorists, all this, or they're not, they just keep on coming back on this, and we just forgot they're human beings. And for example, like this photo, I would love to put on my computer background without people just saw it and just keep on having this same conversation with me again and again. And I can finally see an image and break all this narratives, and I feel more free about seeing them as real persons. So really thank you for your work. Yeah.
Thank you. I'll send you a high quality image for your work.
For your background. Yes, please. We're nearing the last question, so please.
A question for Donald. Donald. You said earlier at the beginning of this discussion, when we were on the page of refugees, the photos, that we can see them as mascots, right? You used the word mascots. Not mascots?
No.
Okay.
Maybe somebody else? Final question? Yeah. Yeah, please. Sorry, Reem, I'm going to give it to you.
Hi, my name's Anna. This is for Joyce. How do you choose what projects you take on, and do you need to feel that you're in support of them completely, morally?
Yeah.
Good question. We look for potential in the story, for potential to contribute something to what's out there already, and it doesn't mean that it has to be a subject which isn't talked about a lot, because we also do projects about refugees, which is talked about a lot, but then we look for something unique that it adds to the debate, and sometimes it is a very underlit issue, and we choose that. But also that's something we're still finding out what has a lot of potential, what actually ends up working in the end, and evaluating is a big part of that. And we're wondering, should we focus on a certain number of themes? Is that how we can create the most impact, by dedicating ourselves to those 2 or 3 themes and then working with a fixed set of partners on that? Or so it's an ongoing search.
If you have suggestions, email the Impact Academy. So I want to go to some final remarks from your side. So we discussed artistic quality, we discussed documentary, we discussed reaching the masses, we discussed let's say the core of the project, the story that you actually need to tell, the reflection of the photographer in it. It's a huge question that we try to do, just skim the surface, I think. But, so let me start with Donald. Can photography change the image on refugees? If you can just...
I also think that it's difficult to be so absolute about something as well. And I think it can contribute, and it does contribute, but it can also not contribute. It can sort of defile It can go many, many different ways, and maybe that's part of the power of photography, and that it sort of goes released into the world, and everybody starts participating within that photograph in a completely different level. And perhaps that's part of the issue, is that maybe we're not sort of all on the same page in how to actually engage with photography anymore. I don't know. I mean, yeah, I don't want to say yes or no, because I think it, as you see in Omar's case, yeah, it can. But when you go to that Google page, no, it can't. So it all sort of also depends. And I think we would be going down the wrong river if we could be sort of to say yes or to no. And I don't think that we can expect to sort of recreate a voice of photography in a global sense, because it is a global culture that has many different cultures that have many different perspectives on how things and such could be said. So that's my non-committal answer.
Yeah, well, Omar, please.
Well, for me, photography is just a tool, an element, a format. It's like asking, can internet change the image of refugee? I mean, can internet reduce terrorism? Well, then my answer, no. The terrorists use social media more than the non-terrorist guy, so it's not helping. So for the refugees and photography, it depends about who is carrying the camera and what he's trying to say. Yeah. And he can say that the same vision through newspaper or photography or Twitter. So for sure it can, if we can create a community of a society shaper and give them some cameras.
Thank you. Joyce, final words.
Yeah, well, I agree with the two men, and also with what Robin said. I think it definitely can contribute, and it interacts with all those other realms of society, such as politics and such as journalism. And if we're going to go around and change the loop and go back to the picture of Mauro, Frederik told me beforehand, I'm going to show that picture of Mauro, so I thought I'm the only Dutch person on the panel. I need to know that story, so that's why I looked it up. So I also know what happened in terms of bigger impact. And that photo is also credited for almost a parliamentary crisis, but also for creating a lot of support among the general population on the kinderpardon. I'm not sure how to translate that. And was one of the reasons that created a need for a parliamentary debate on the kinderpardon, which followed a year after Mauro's case. Yeah. So I think that's a nice example of how photography can change or can contribute to change something.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I would love to invite you to come back. As from Wednesday, we will have the full Studio Aleppo exhibition up here in the foyer. And next week, Sunday, we will talk more about The Hague and welcoming refugees. So please come back and enjoy your Sunday night. Thank you very much.